It's Brian Shannon from alphatrends.net. Today is Friday, the 8th of April, 2022, and we had more selling in the markets this week, uh, pretty much across the board. I guess oil was up a little bit and biotech's just up a little bit. Semiconductors were down close to 7%, and that's been our main reason for concern about this market and continues to do so. Bitcoin went back to negative for the year, down 2% with that's 2% for the year now with its 7% loss this week. It was once again the Miami conference kind of jinxed it. Anyways, the S&P 500, you can see here, came down pretty much exactly the way we were talking about last week. In fact, here's a screen grab from the video last Thursday at the end of the quarter. I had suggested that if we get stuck below the 5-day moving average, we would likely come down and down to the volume weighted average price from the March low. That's pretty much exactly what we saw happen, and that 5-day moving average is still curling lower. So let's take a look at that on the actual chart here. But here we are. That's the volume weighted average price from the March low. You can see we're battling with that a little bit. This is the week to date VWAP and of course the declining 5-day moving average. I think that you have to look at the intermediate term as guilty till proven innocent with that declining 5-day moving average. We've got this little band of support. If that gives up, then I think there's going to be deeper trouble ahead. So realistically, we're really just, I think next week is going to be critical. We have this support, which held as resistance. We've got the VWAP coming off at the top, showing that the average purchaser from that point is now losing money. The average short is gaining, is making money. And on the daily time frame, though, this is what confuses it. We have the volume weighted average price off of that low, along with this green 50-day moving average and the blue 20-day moving average. And that pink is the year-to-date volume weighted average price. So, this vertical line was 51 days ago. So next week, as we get rid of on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday these days of data, well, that 50-day moving average, which is rising right now, if the market goes flat, well, the 50-day moving average is going to start to decline. So it's really kind of tricky in here right now. The question is, is this going to be the start of something bigger and perhaps, a little bit more urgent in terms of the selling, perhaps coming down to one of these levels, such as 410, not next week, but over the coming weeks. We've tested this volume weighted average price successfully, and it's possible we come back down to that. Well, we have to take it in bite-sized pieces. So let's go back to the 30-minute time frame and try to sketch out what the possibilities are. If for some reason the market can right itself and that 5-day moving average does something like this and it gets back above that volume weighted average price from the peak, then I think you're going to see a hard time for the sellers. What I think is more likely, however, is something that looks like this, that volume weighted average price is going to get trapped. It's going to look something more along the lines of this and then break down, get trapped underneath it, and continue lower. So I think that of these two scenarios, this is most likely. We'll see what happens. I mean, again, it's a pivotal week. I'm not trying to, not make a call, but it's going to go either direction here. And tomorrow, next week again is going to be a critical one. So, if you have positions that you've ridden higher during this bounce and you're nervous about them, next week is going to be your chance to determine whether you hold them or if you, get out of them before this market potentially falls apart. And of course, the NASDAQ is a little bit worse as it's below the volume weighted average price from the March low. It's below the 20 and the 50-day moving average. It's still below the year-to-date volume weighted average price. Now, short term, it's just a little bit oversold, but it's still stuck below this VWAP. If we see something along the lines of this and then it breaks down, I think that you've got to look at this and say we're probably headed pretty good, for a pretty good sell-off here. The weekly time frame, we came right up to the conjunction of the 20, 30, and 40-week moving average. That's not what happens in bull markets. And the biggest reason for concern, of course, is still these semiconductors. The semiconductors, as we've noted, they are back below that volume-weighted average price from the March low. They're below the declining 20 and declining 50-day moving average. And the semiconductors lead the NASDAQ. So with these guys breaking down, it stands to reason that the NASDAQ will follow next week. The bigger level of interest as potential support, we only know support after the fact, so we call them a level of interest where we have the potential support can be found. That's really down near about 230. So be careful in here. If you look at the definition of trend, we have lower highs and lower lows, support broken, acting as resistance, and it seems like it's a little bit oversold near term. So if we get a bounce, as long as we remain below that declining 5-day moving average, it's guilty till proven innocent, and you're better off looking for short opportunities. It could turn higher, but the odds certainly don't suggest that that's the case. The biotechs continue to basically, do a little bit of nothing in here. I think that they are the type of group that if they didn't scare you out on the way down, they're likely to wear you out. And since I drew a trend line, let's just make it a proper trend line and connect it like this. And you can see that it's actually stuck just below that trend line. I hadn't even realized that because, as you know, I'm not really a big user of trend lines. Even if the trend line breaks, it only means the rate of descent has declined. It doesn't mean that the trend is higher and that you're going to, see a miraculous turnaround for this group that's been in a horrific downtrend. Again, if they don't scare you out on the way down, they typically wear you out as the stocks go sideways. And we can look at all kinds of examples of that. Upstart is one. What is doing that. A lot of people were buying Upstart after as it declined, and then in here thinking, hey, I caught the low, but guess what? It's right back down to those lows. DKNG, same story. Big betting and all that stuff. Market doesn't care. It's in a downtrend. It's guilty till proven innocent. If they don't scare you out, they will typically wear you out. Let's take a look at energy. I'm sorry, the banks. The banks are stuck below that volume weighted average price from the March low as well. What that's telling us is the average participant from the lowest point it's traded at this year is losing money. The average long. The average short seller has something to defend. They're in control here. So, the financials have been pretty sloppy. This is what we were looking for last week. We did get weakness, not in the same way, that I had projected. But again, it's still in a terrible downtrend. It's not a terrible downtrend, but it's still in a downtrend. The 20-day moving average is below the 50-day moving average. That 20-day moving average will start to flatten out next week as well. Energy names continue to hold up and actually break to new highs. There's a lot of names in that group that actually look pretty decent, but they just don't seem to really follow through. CIVI is one of those. It broke this big level of resistance. That resistance is holding a support. It's not the trading type of stock that I look for, but certainly you can't argue with the bullishness of this resistance being broken and holding a support and right at that rising 20-day moving average. So if you're into energy names, I'd say keep an eye on CIVI, keep an eye on CPE, another one that, longer term, it's had a good run, but it still has a decent looking weekly time frame. The daily time frame suggests it could still move higher. OIS, this one is another energy name. It always looks bullish, but it never seems to go up. The range is tightening here on this weekly time frame. I don't trade these energy names because I don't like this frustration, frustrating back and forth. It doesn't mean you can't make money in them, obviously, but you have to choose what you like to trade. And I certainly don't like to trade the energy names. I've had, not great success with them in the past. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like, maybe comment as well. But that's all. Thanks and have a good weekend.